Thank you for having me and asking me to speak here. It's a totally undeserved and unexpected honor because, frankly, I must confess, I'm not normally a fan of memoirs, even though, like everyone else, I'm an avid reader of them for the gossip. But this one is different, as we were just told. It's probably one of the best that I've ever read. It's a great read, and it's like Mani. It reflects him. It's charming, it's witty. It conveys a very intimate sense of a very different time and a very different place. For me, of course, what stood out is his diplomatic career, which I think was an object of admiration for many of us. Especially the Pakistan bits in the book are really worth reading. I went to Pakistan 21 years after Mani Shankar Aiyar and Suneet had left. And when we first went to Karachi, and every time we did, the first question every Pakistani would ask us is, how is Mani Shankar Aiyar? And what's he doing now? And frankly, what he describes in the book is a Pakistan that I remember from the early 2000s. I don't know whether it's still there, whether we can still speak of that Pakistan, because my Indian and Pakistani friends tell me that it's different. I know that the India that we represented in Pakistan is different from what it was in our time. But it's well worth reading. Mani makes one point which I think is worth thinking about. He said, if anyone should understand Pakistan, it should be us in India. We should understand a society in drastic churn and drastic social and political change, where power is being redistributed and used for less than laudable purposes. And we know about living with parallel realities and the contradictions that entails. But as Mani asks rightly, do we have the courage to engage? I think that's really the question. Other people will, of course, turn to the book for the politics of it. I mean, he was not just a diplomat, he was also a politician. But for the full political saga, I think we have to await the companion volume that he promises on Rajiv Gandhi's premiership and thereafter. But even so, there are portions here which are of great interest. He clarifies his relationship to Rajiv Gandhi. He describes the working of that PMO, which is useful to know that there are different ways of working. He also demolishes the myth that PMO was an old boys club from Doon school. And I think he does that very convincingly. It was a PMO that reflected India's variety and the various opinions that existed. I mean, from Gopi Arora's socialist inclinations to Montague's reformist. And I think that's really the way it should be, because that's what India is. Which brings me to what I really wanted to say. Even though, apologies, I risk damaging your carefully constructed reputation as a maverick, as I think Wiseman of the New York Times once said, he's a man who has an amazing talent to abuse and amuse. And as the man who never met a quip that he could resist. But when I first joined the Foreign Service, very early, somebody told me, the trouble with old diplomats is they lapse into anecdotage. And Mani's book is full of stories. He's a master raconteur. But when you read those behind the amusing anecdotes, each of which actually makes a serious point, there is a person who actually took his work very seriously and who achieved a great deal. And it's easy to get fooled by the appearance, by the maverick that he presents to the world. When I think the ultimate compliment is is in the book from Rajiv Gandhi, who told him, "You're the only one who, when I give you a task, you go away, come back and tell me when it's done. You don't come back and tell me all the things you couldn't do and what you need." When you look back at what he achieved as a politician, Panchayati Raj, for instance, his contributions as a diplomat in trying circumstances, not just in Pakistan, elsewhere as well, his is a serious career. Only money can make light of it, the way he has done in the book. The other quality which comes through and which he never admits to is his courage. I mean, it takes tremendous courage to leave the safety and security of the Indian Foreign Service and to become a politician. As he said, at a time when he knew that, he was not necessarily joining a winning team at that time. And really that is something quite remarkable, because I think throughout the book what shines through, therefore, is his commitment to the ideals that he believed in right through his life. Of course, he's writing here about a time when we in India had the good sense not to punish people for their good deeds. One compliment to Jagannath for having brought out this book. One thing I really liked is the QR codes in here, that you can actually access the endnotes, detailed notes, and the background material on the internet through the QR codes. I wish more people would do this. It really makes the book much more readable. And also, thank you for a detailed and usable index. I know it promotes the daily read. People open the book and look for their name in the index and then go backwards. But despite that, it's really useful. So all in all, this is how a memoir should be. It can be read at many levels, as a collection of amusing stories, if that's what you want, or as an evocative description of a different time and place, or as an intelligent and pointed commentary on things and people gone by, or even as a means to open presently closed minds. So enjoy the book and be happy that there's more to come. There's a companion volume and volume 2 of the memoir. Thank you, Mani.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. First question, with all this moon landing stuff, are you surprised to see so many people here?
It's astonishing, yes.
Were you excited by the moon landing?
Well, what the moon landing brings to my mind is Rajiv Gandhi's clearly ranking ISRO above our Atomic Energy Commission. And the reason he did that is that he felt that Dr. Ramanna, who was heading the Atomic Energy Commission, was obsessed with making the bomb, whereas Dr. Satish Dhawan, who was heading ISRO, was dead against the weaponization of outer space. So you might describe ISRO as a Gandhian organization, which has just achieved its goal, and the Atomic Energy Commission as clearly anti-Gandhian.
So Gandhian in both senses of the term.
Yes.
Mani, I know many people here want to talk about your time with Rajiv Gandhi, but I always think that the significance of this book is it proves that, contrary to what many people think, you existed long before you met Rajiv Gandhi.
Yes, and more importantly, perhaps, I've continued to exist after.
Long after, yeah.
But I changed my life because I thought I would spend it with Rajiv.
Yeah.
But he went away almost immediately, and I've had to make my way without him. I'm glad I have up to a point.
Yeah, okay. We'll start with I said we won't talk about your Rajiv Gandhi days. We'll start with what many people who don't know you think of you. And the general view is that when Rajiv Gandhi came into politics and he entered office, he brought along a lot of his Cambridge Doon School chums, and they formed the PMO, and that you were one of those chums, and you got in not because of any merit, but because you were Rajiv's pal. Now, it is true that you went to all the right places. You went to Doon, you went to St. Stephen's, you went to Cambridge, but you were no great pal of Rajiv Gandhi. So let's just talk a bit about that.
The man was, or the boy, was 3 years younger than me at school.
Yeah.
And it was a school that didn't give a toss that the Prime Minister's grandson was in it.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know the chap at all. And nobody made a big fuss about the Prime Minister's grandson being there. And the only memory I have of Rajiv at school is that it arose from a rule in the school that boys who had done their senior Cambridge exam could swim at any time, whereas boys who hadn't done their senior Cambridge exam had to get the permission of a senior in order to be able to swim. And I have this very clear memory of a boy very nervously walking up to me, scratching his left ankle with his right toe and saying, "Yar, give us permission, yar, to swim." Now, the usual Doon School senior reaction is to say, blank, off. I fortunately didn't. And I gave him permission rather graciously. And I've often wondered whether if I'd used the standard Doon School expression, he'd have ever taken me into PMO. No, I was the only Doon School boy there, other than Wajahat, who was a holdover from Indira's time and spent only a year and a half in PMO with us. And as far as I can remember...
Well, Arun Singh, who was MOS PMO.
Arun Singh was, but he was not in PMO. Well, he was in PMO, but as a minister. So he was a political appointee, and his appointment, I think very sadly, ended within 9 months. And then there were consequences to that were extremely unfortunate.
The unwritten subtext to all of this stuff about you and Rajiv being pals, which clearly you were not, was that all of you came from a background of enormous privilege. I think people see you as being a really privileged young kid. In fact, you actually had quite a hard childhood in life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it wasn't a hard childhood, but it was a rather penurious childhood.
Well, yes.
And this
I was trying to use hard as a sort of synonym for that.
And that was because my father was a very successful chartered accountant and income tax advisor, but he was killed in an air crash when I was just over 12 years old. And we found to our horror that the only assets the family had were 8,000 rupees in the bank account. And then my mother rummaged among the papers and discovered an insurance policy that was for the princely sum of 3 lakh rupees, which in today's money is about 3 crore rupees. So we were financially saved, but because the Hindu Succession Act had not yet been passed, neither my mother nor my sister could inherit any of that. And the 3 boys were all minors, so we were put into the guardianship court. And my most vivid memory of my adolescence is sitting utterly bored with my mother's lawyer as he went through the accounts before submitting it to the guardianship court. And because my mother insisted that we should continue to be in the most expensive school in India, we also had to economize when we were at home. So one of the disturbing elements of my youth was that in teenage, when you desperately want good clothes, we always were in school clothes, even during the holidays. With the result that when I got my first colorful bush shirt, it was given to me by my uncle Minhaj Mirza in Lucknow, and I remember the date till today. On the 16th of June, 1957, I received my first colorful bush shirt that reminded me, at least, of Devanand in CID. It was one of the high points of my life.
But you were actually quite keen on your school uniform. There's a story in the book about your going to a tutorial at Cambridge wearing your Doon school blazer.
Yes. Well, that was, of course, a little later.
Yeah.
I went to Cambridge and was given a supervisor that's a tutor, that's Cambridge Talk, his supervisor, called Frank Hahn at Churchill College. And he was a martinet. And his first remark to us was, "But how have they let you in?" And then we had to overcome that. He said about Dr. Kurian's testimonial for me, he said, "A great testimonial, but why does the man have to write them on pink toilet paper?" He was also the one who said to us in our second term, "Perhaps you'll make the grade." And in my last term, he really set the cat among the pigeons by saying that one of us, that is the New Zealander who went to supervisions with me, a Shell scholar and remains a great friend, he said, "One of you will get a first." So when we came into the corridor, there was a huge fight between Jock Milne and me, with Jock saying he meant you and me saying no, he meant you. In the event, we both got a 2-2. So but the story that Vir wants me to tell is about my going into a supervision with my Doon School Old Boys blazer. And as I walked in, Hahn looked up, pointed to my breast pocket, and said, "What is that?" And I said, with all pride, I said, "That, sir, is the lamp of knowledge." And he replied, "A pity they didn't light it while you were at school."
It's a story. It's a story made famous by Rajiv Gandhi because he told it when he went to Doon School on Founders
Most
Day.
unfortunately, I told Rajiv about this as we were flying to Dehradun for the Doon School Golden Jubilee. And he made it clear that the story was about, as he described it, a friend of his. But the silly media, they just missed that line and attributed it to him, poor chap. It never happened to him, it happened to me. Well, that's the way with our media, alas.
What was it like for somebody like you, who've grown up in Dehradun, gone to St. Stephen's, to go to Cambridge in those days?
Well, I arrived at Cambridge, and after I'd been there for about a month, I suddenly discovered that I was far more at home in Cambridge than I'd ever felt in India. I said to myself...
That's what comes of going to Doon School.
Sorry?
That's what comes of going to Doon School.
That's what comes of going to Doon School, because our best masters at school were two Englishmen, the headmaster, J.A.K. Martin, and R.L. Holdsworth, whom everybody calls Holdy. These were marvelous English people who stayed on in India. In fact, Martin died in India. R.L. Holdsworth fell very ill and therefore had to go back. And also Hercilia Oliphant, who had started Welham School, and the subtitle said, "For Indian Boys," because all of them were people of goodwill towards India who wanted to ensure that India would have a proper educational infrastructure when it became independent. So I'd absorbed from them a huge number of values, a huge number of views, a lot of literature, and I was shocked to discover that I was completely at home at Cambridge, much more than in India. And that made me, I thought, a coconut Indian, brown on the outside, white on the inside. So my reaction to that was to become furiously xenophobic as an Indian. Now, I didn't know why I should be proud of being an Indian, but I did feel I was very proud of being an Indian, and I was, of course, very anti-colonial and very anti-imperial, and I was actually a red, or at least a pink. And then when we came back to India, and we went on this Bharat Darshan as Foreign Service probationers, we went to the Ellora temple, and that was, for me, was the moment of epiphany. When I looked at that temple, there's not a single name of a sculptor that we can see. And they started carving that temple from a rock, knowing full well that the temple would not be completed before they died. And yet they produced this marvel. And it struck me that we were producing this marvel when the bloody Englishmen were wandering around in bearskins. So I retrieved my honor at Ellora.
You were, in fact, when you were at Cambridge, not quite a crypto-communist, but fairly left-wing, right?
Well, I went there as a communist. I was an emotional communist.
Yeah.
Marx's most pejorative term for people like me is utopian socialist, as against scientific socialist. And I was a utopian socialist, largely because I was the poorest boy in the richest school. And I used to look at them. Some of them are sitting in the audience, so they'll forgive me. And I asked myself, why is it that they have an assured future, whereas we don't even have a fan in our home? And it seemed to me that they were where they were and going to be where they were going to be because of their family wealth, whereas I would have to struggle. I'm more than ready to struggle, but this inequality struck me. The strange thing about Doon School is that there was complete equality within the walls in the Chandbagh estate. But subtly we were informed that we were superior to everybody outside. And the result was that we came out with an enormous amount of self-confidence. And one of my friends at St. Stephen's, Subhash Dua, said to me, I hate you fellows. So I said, why? He said, you walk around this place as if you own it. So I said, but we don't own it, so why don't you walk around this place as if you own it? I think that's the difference between a DOSCO and the others. We were given an excessive amount of self-confidence. And then we had to learn the hard way, the tough way, after we left school.
Do you think, it was a criticism that's often leveled at your generation of public school boys. And if you read the book, it's full of people who you were at school with who are quite well known now. It's not just going on stage and telling Vajata people like you loved them or whatever. It's all the others also with whom you had fairly close contacts. That in a sense that the India you grew up in is dead.
The India I grew up in was the India in which I went to Doon School. Yeah. And the great thing about this school, which was led by two Englishmen, and I would say my preparatory school, which was led by an English woman, was such that they did not impart to us what you might call the values of the European Renaissance, but the values of the Indian Renaissance that was taking place simultaneously. Now my entire generation, including Upi Thanka, who's sitting in the front row, I don't know how they gave you a front row seat, but anyway, including him, thank you. Keep it, we'll wear it later. Is that they did not impart to us values that were imported from Great Britain. They brought in the values of the Indian freedom. Yeah. And I think the most influential thing was our assembly prayers, which were drawn, yes, from several different religions, but much more importantly, they were projected to us without any religious bias. And they involved the poetry and the songs of not only Mirabai, but also Allama Iqbal, Rabindranath Tagore, Abide With Me. So we ended up living in school in a completely secular atmosphere, in which nobody looked at anybody else and said, you're a Muslim or whatever it was. And that enabled us to confront the India of the 20th and 21st century, which is an India of immense diversity, in which we can only live in unity if we all respect each other as human beings and accord equality to each other as citizens of India, and not indulge in majoritarianism, which inevitably leads to authoritarianism.
When you finished at Cambridge, you sat for the civil services exam. You did extremely well. You were in the top 10. You got the foreign service, which you opted for. Not something the top 10 do these days, but in those days it was still something to look forward to and look up to. And then, when you thought you were in, the government To India refused to allow you in on the grounds that you were a communist.
Yeah, they branded me a communist. And I knew that I was finished when I received a telegram saying, regret to inform you, rejected from all services. So I rushed back to India, and I was very fortunate that my mother, who was an orphan and therefore could not be given away in marriage, had joined the Madras Educational Service and been posted to Visakhapatnam for her first posting. And there the authorities didn't know what to do with her because they had never encountered a single adult woman who didn't have a family. So they had to find somewhere for her to live. And somebody suggested that since the Andhra University vice chancellor had a huge house but lived alone, that whether he would take her in as a paying guest. And he was none other than Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. So when I came back from Cambridge on the 15th of July, 1963, by the evening, I found myself in Rashtrapati Bhavan. And he was lying as he usually did, with lots of pillows at his back in his bed, in his four-poster bed. And the only question he asked me was, he says, did you join the British Communist Party in England? I said I couldn't because they only take in British nationals. And I said even intelligence in India, I don't know why they're called intelligence, is the one quality they lack. But anyway, I said the intelligence in India knows that I'm not a member of the Communist Party of India. And therefore, there was no question of my joining the Communist Party. And then Radhakrishnan said that when I was presiding over the Rajya Sabha, I heard Prime Minister Nehru assure the House that a civil servant, even of the IAS or the IFS, could have his individual political opinion and vote for any party he wanted. But he could not join, nor she could join, any political party in India, including the ruling Congress. And therefore he turned to Gopal, his son, and said, ask Lal Bahadur Shastri to see me. So I thought it was done. And then I got a call from Gopal saying that Lal Bahadur came to see father yesterday and father gave him a real wigging. So you'll be in the Foreign Service in a few days. But what happened in a few days was the Kamaraj plan. And Lal Bahadur got dropped from the cabinet. And I found myself absolutely in the wilderness. Then I have a friend called Arvind Pandey, who's perhaps here in the hall somewhere. And I went to see him because I was very low. It was now 3 months and nothing had happened. So he said to me that the additional Home Secretary, a man called L.P. Singh, Special Home Secretary, I think he's called, he's a well-known martinet in the ICS, had been at his home for dinner the previous night and asked Arvind, why doesn't this man come to see me? So then B.D. Pandey, that was the father, walked in and said, tomorrow 11 o'clock, you must go to South Block, which is where his office was, in what is today the Defense Ministry. So I fetched up with my raw silk jacket and my well-creased trousers, which my mother had forced me to buy, because she could never say Marxist. She always said Marxist. And she believed that I was being called a Marxist because I always wore jeans. So I was sent to La France and asked to buy this and a tie. And I refused to wear the tie as a symbol of bourgeoisie and used to wrap it up and put it in my pocket. Well, I put on the tie. I went to see L.P. Singh. And L.P. Singh was a bear. I'd never known him. His daughter is sitting in the audience. He's a bear of a man, he's a huge person. And his office was tiny, and it had a huge desk on it. And he said, took out his cigar, tapped the ash off it, and said, Aiyar, sit down. So I took my place. He said, Aiyar, you're not to regard yourself as a prisoner in the dock. So I said, yes, sir. He says, I just want to ask you a few questions. So he did. It so happened that that morning, Macmillan had resigned, and Alec Douglas Hume, a 14th belted earl, who had not yet taken off his ermine, had been made the Prime Minister of England. So I found myself arguing with L.P. Singh over the relative merits of democracy in the United Kingdom and Egypt. I said that this rotter becomes the Prime Minister in Britain without even getting elected to the House of Commons. And there in Egypt, we have Gamal Abdel Nasser, a man who will get 95% of the vote if he conducted an election. And L.P. Singh looked quizzical and said, the only time I went abroad was to the United States. And on my way back, I stopped off with Ambassador Apa Pant in Cairo. And that night, Nasser rounded up all the Copts of Egypt and exiled some, imprisoned some, and hanged the others. What kind of a democracy is this? So at that point, I went completely berserk. And I said to him, sir, you asked me not to regard myself as a prisoner in the dock. But a prisoner in the dock is given 3 privileges that are being denied me. So L.P. Singh said, what do you mean? So I said, first, he's presumed innocent until he's proved guilty. I said, you're asking me to prove my innocence. Second, I said, he is told what the charges against him are. I said, I've never been told what the charges against me are. And third, I said, that if you don't have the money, the court is required to give you a lawyer. And I am not even being allowed to call in my witnesses. At which point, he again took his cigar out of his mouth, tapped the ash, and said, Aiyar, you're in, now out. And that's how I got into the Foreign Service. But on the official file, which is a secret, but I did get to see it, thanks to one Foreign Secretary who is in our midst, I saw that to get me admitted, there was an entry, a last entry on the note sheet. It said, I agree to what the Home Minister had recommended. I agree. I too have heard good reports of Mani Shankar Aiyar. He may be taken into the Indian Foreign Service and sent to Missouri for his training. Signed, J. Nehru, 23 October 1963. Gosh, that was enough to make up for the terrible trauma that M.K. Narayan and the Intelligence Bureau had put me through.
You asked Narayanan about this later when he sort of joined politics,
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I said to Narayanan, who had by then become a good friend of mine, because he was the director of the IB when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, that he became governor of West Bengal and very kindly allowed my wife and me to stay with him. So I said to him, where did you get your information from? I said, did you get it from the British, from the BIS? He said, yes. So I said, but don't you know that BIS stands for British Information Service, not British Intelligence Service? And that all they do is press clippings. So they picked up a number of press clippings about me and sent them to you. And you almost succeeded in preventing me from having a diplomatic career. And he laughed and he said, he was the undersecretary in the IB. He said, every time I thought I had won and you were going to be out, yet another bloody VIP letter would land and I had to restart the whole file. So that was how I got into the service.
Your L.P. Singh story, where you go to meet one of the giants of Indian administration and you argue with him. Yeah, there's a problem with this mic, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I need another mic, is there? There's one.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure this works either.
Human getting it.
Do we have a third mic? We do, all right.
I hope it works.
Is this working? Can you finally hear me? All right. Now, the L.P. Singh story, that would never happen today, would it? that you who was trying to get into the civil service would talk to one of the giants of the civil service.
They would have asked me today, why did you go to Doon school and not the Shivananda ashram?
Yeah. Most likely they would have arrested you if you talk like that to three of us.
Actually, I did.
Though the Narayanan kind of thing still happens.
Sorry?
What Narayanan did, that kind of thing still happens.
Well, he
Unfortunately.
laughed. And
Unfortunately.
it was, after all, this was nearly 30, 40 years after the event.
Yeah. When we talk about your foreign service career, you who was so lefty and all of that, in fact, in all your postings, you don't seem particularly enamored of the communist regimes you served with, like
No,
Vietnam, for instance.
In fact, my closest friend ever, Shekhar Dasgupta, who alas is no more with us, he was the one who remarked that they let you into the service because they discovered you were a Marxist of the Groucho variety. So I had got completely disillusioned with communism because when I got to Cambridge, there were a number of questions in my mind that Shekhar Dasgupta, who was an absolutely dyed-in-the-wool red, and Muzzy Majumdar, who was another communist, had put into my mind. But I had questions which they couldn't answer. So I specifically asked Frank Hahn of the Blazer story whether I could have special tutorials or supervisions with Maurice Dobb, who was the most famous Marxist academic at Cambridge. And Hahn was amused, but he told me he'd arrange it. And sure enough, there was dropped into my keyhole in the Porter's Lodge a letter from Dobb saying that I could meet him on such and such a date at 6 p.m. So I went to see him, and he said, supervisions are to be paid for. So I didn't have any money. I mean, we had 600 pounds a year. So I looked at him and said, sorry, sir, I can't pay. And he says, never mind. If you want to have a glass of sherry with me every Thursday evening, please come in at 6 o'clock. And that's how I had my supervisions with Maurice Dobb. But he couldn't answer my questions either. I mean, I then discovered that top Marxists have feet of clay too. So I came out, and then I found a book by Claire Sheridan, who was the first cousin of Winston Churchill and was a sculptor. And she had gone to Moscow at Kamenev's invitation in 1919. And she stayed there for 3 years, sculpting the bust of all those who had run the Russian Revolution. And her clear favorite was Trotsky. And therefore, at the end of her 3-year stay, she goes to meet Trotsky, and she describes the beautiful tea service and the cucumber sandwiches. And when Trotsky walks in and sits next to her, she says, Comrade Trotsky, I just don't believe the awful things they say about you. And he pulls out a pistol, puts it at her temple, and said, if I thought you could harm our cause one whit, I'd shoot you dead here. Then he returns his pistol to his pocket and says, but as you do not matter, have another cucumber sandwich. At this point, I said, I could not eat dinner in hall, that's called the dining hall in Cambridge, dinner in hall on Fridays, because for some bizarre Christian tribal custom, they would serve only fish. And they'd produce this trout, and his beady eye would look at me as I attempted to slice it. So I walked out of the hall, and I said, I can't face a dead fish. How am I going to kill in the manner that Karl Marx has recommended? So I'd ceased being a commie, but of course our intelligence bureau didn't know that, and therefore put me through the ringer.
Now, there's a lot in the book about the ambassadors you worked with, people like Shelwankar and co, but much of it very entertaining, and I recommend it. It's pretty unputdownable. But what was probably the crowning glory of your diplomatic career was Pakistan.
Yes.
Now, as you've described in the book, even within the Foreign Service, there were two views on your approach to Pakistan. Mani Dixit, for whom you had a lot of regard, very famously said that you took a Pollyanna approach to Pakistan. So do you want to talk a little bit about why you thought we were wrong on Pakistan? Because there's quite a lot in the book about how we misunderstand the way of
I
dealing with
think the
Pakistan.
majority of the Foreign Service is completely wrong on Pakistan.
Yeah.
And that our Ministry of External Affairs, which is so brilliant in understanding Paraguay, just does not understand our neighboring country, Pakistan. And the reason for this is that their minds, I'm saying this in front of Sham Saran, who is perhaps one of our most distinguished foreign secretaries, their minds are full of prejudices. And if you read Chinmay Ghare Khan's book called Centers of Power, he writes about 12 pages on how the entire elite of Indira Gandhi's PMO were engaged in competing with each other in giving drafts of a treaty which they hoped the Pakistanis would reject. I mean, imagine wasting your time writing up a treaty in the hope that the Pakistanis would reject it. I can understand their spending time writing up a treaty which they hope the Pakistanis will accept. But to waste their time in such a manner, and that too by one of the most brilliant Foreign Service officers we've ever had. And this involved Rasgotra, it involved G. Parthasarathi, it involved Sharda Prasad, it involved P.C. Alexander. They were all competing for Indira Gandhi's favor. And yet, what was the purpose of the exercise? So in Pakistan, when we arrived, I went straight to my office. The office was a huge 3-story building, 4-story building, but all of it had been totally neglected since even before the 1971 war. In fact, been totally neglected since the 1965 war. So all 3 of us, my 2 clerks and me, along with the driver, we were all in a single room with one telephone between us. And the telephone rang. One of my clerks picked it up and said, "Sir, this is from the office of the Deputy Commissioner Sakkar." Surprised that the Deputy Commissioner Sakkar should be calling the Indian High Commission directly, or the Indian Consulate directly. So I picked up the phone, and there was a very troubled liaison officer, Pakistani, on the other side. Why was he there? Well, L.K. Advani had visited Karachi about a month earlier, and he had arranged for a Hindu sant who had fled from Sakkar, actually from a place called Sard Bela, to Raipur in the 1965 war. And Advani had arranged with the Pakistan government that this spiritual guru could return to Sard Bela to provide spiritual guidance to the Hindus who are in substantial numbers in Upper Sindh. So this liaison officer's problem was, he said, "Sir, I don't know what to do. Your Hindu son's Muslim murids want to meet him." So I said, "Yes." He says, "Sir, can you give me permission to do so?" I said, "Yes, of course." My first job in Pakistan was to permit a Pakistani government official to allow Pakistanis, ordinary Pakistani Muslims, to receive spiritual guidance from a Hindu sant. Naturally, it caused me very considerable consternation. And then a few days later, there's a long story attached to it. Well, Sunit and I were walking back from a dinner given to us in the Sindh Club by a Pakistani prisoner of war. He'd been in India as our guest for 3 years. So as we walked back, Sunit asked me a question. She said, "This is an enemy country, right?" It's a question that reverberated in my mind through my 3 years in Karachi and has continued to reverberate in my mind for the last 40 years. Is Pakistan an enemy country? Well, my short answer to that is that the Pakistanis are not an enemy people. The government of Pakistan does a lot of things that does make them an enemy of ours. But how far are they reacting to us, and how far are they provoking us? In any case, what is the point of having a joint commission with Paraguay, except to give Foreign Service officers the opportunity of stopping off in New York and going to Macy's? There's no point at all. But when it comes to Pakistan, we have the courage to indulge in surgical strikes against them. But we don't have the guts to sit across a table and talk to a Pakistani. We'll get much the better of them. Why don't we have the courage to talk to them? Actually, I don't know whether we'll get the better of them, because one of the best things about partition is that it enabled me to come into the Foreign Service. If we'd been a united country and I had to compete with my Pakistani counterparts, I don't think I'd have done so well in the civil service exam. They're first class. They're first class, they're extremely friendly, and provided you don't carry your prejudices to them, but react to them as human beings to human beings, they love the same jokes that we crack. In fact, I had an entire trove of anti-Zia jokes on which I dined out for all the 3 years that I was in Zia's Pakistan. They can't be repeated in this company.
You suggest in the book, and I'm cutting short a very complicated thing, that an element of what we feel about Pakistan as a nation is guided by Hindu communalists, and Pakistan stands in for what they feel about Muslims.
Yes, I'm afraid increasingly Pakistan is ceasing to be a foreign policy issue. It's becoming a domestic issue, because the word Pakistan and the word Pakistani are used as dog whistles to indicate the Indian Muslim community. And that is why, take these icons of Indian youth, Salman Khan, Amir Ali Khan, Saif Ali Khan, Shah Rukh Khan, they've all been told, go to Pakistan. Why go to Pakistan? Why not say go to Bangladesh? Why not say go to Saudi Arabia? Why not say go to Indonesia? No, it's only go to Pakistan, so that the prejudices that we have against Pakistanis are transferred to the Muslim icons of India's youth. And that is why I say that it is increasingly being made a domestic issue by this refusal to engage with Pakistan. After all, if they do engage with Pakistan, and like Manmohan Singh, who engaged with Pakistan and arrived at a 4-point draft agreement with them on what? Not on visas, not on films, not on Bollywood songs, not on tourism, not on trade. It was on Kashmir that the 4-point program was made, by actually engaging with the Pakistanis. And so if we engage with them, if we deploy the talents of our foreign secretaries in talking to the Pakistanis, instead of wasting their talents by indulging in how not to talk to the Pakistanis, I don't see what we're going to gain. And so long as we are not able to settle our issues and have a viable relationship with Pakistan, I'm afraid Pakistan will be an albatross around our necks, and we will never become the Vishwa Guru to the world. How are we going to advise Russia on Ukraine when we don't know an iota about how to handle Pakistan?
Okay. Moving away from Pakistan, the general view of you among your detractors is that you're essentially what? A chamcha of the Gandhi family, a stooge, and I know member of the family is in the audience. In fact, as the book reveals, you've actually had mixed feelings about the family. You're very critical of Indira Gandhi in the book. You're very critical of the emergency. You talk about your joy when Indira Gandhi was defeated, when the emergency was lifted. You also...
That had a funny story. Let me just tell you.
Like a last story.
Mrs. Gandhi was defeated in the election when I was posted in Baghdad. And I was a bit surprised to find that a lot of Iraqis were wearing a black bandage around their arm. And I thought some Baath leader had died. But when I went to see somebody with whom I had an appointment, a very bright Iraqi, a very well-educated Iraqi, I found that he also had a black band around his arm. And as I sat down and we ordered tea, he then said to me in Arabic, but it was in Arabic I could not easily understand. He said, Indira Gandhi, khalas? So I said, I was beaming. I said, yeah, Indira Gandhi, khalas. So he said, shook his head and said, shouldn't do it to a woman. So I said, shouldn't do what to a woman? He said, khalas. I said, no. Indira Gandhi, not khalas. He looked at me amazed and said, Indira Gandhi, khalas, not khalas? So I said, yeah, not khalas. So he says, you know, in our country, and he used another Arabic word, ruba, which means a quarter. He said, in our country, when we have a revolution, ruba Iraqis are killed. Ruba Iraqis are imprisoned. Ruba Iraqis are exiled. And we rule over the remaining Ruba. And here you're saying, Indira Gandhi khalas, but not khalas. So this was, this showed the democratic character of our country, which had survived the emergency, and which has survived
You
until very
actually
recently.
have a similar story.
Sorry?
You have a similar story about when the Janta government falls and you're in Pakistan and a guy says to you about the Prime Minister resigning. He says,
yes. I happened to be in Delhi on consultations on the day that George Fernandez, who later on, largely because the leader of my parliamentary party used to think that I was the right person to combat George Fernandez. But George Fernandez that day made a brilliant speech, which I heard from the visitors' gallery, or maybe it was the official gallery, defending the Morarji government. And by the time I took an afternoon plane to go to Karachi, the government had fallen. So I learned in Karachi that the Morarji government was no more. And I went directly from the airport to the Sindh Club, where a very well-known Pakistani personality was holding a party. And as I walked in, he looked at me and said, Buckingham Palace Yar? So I didn't know what he meant. So then he shook his head and said, Buckingham Palace Yar. So I inquired, what did he mean? He says, which country do you think you are in? In England, when the government falls, the Prime Minister goes to the Queen and resigns. In our country, we conduct a coup. And in your country, the man loses an election and goes directly to the president to resign. That was the difference between India and Pakistan. But, the poor Pakistanis used to have such an inferiority complex that to soothe their feelings, I tell them, actually, you run a very inefficient dictatorship. Because my previous postings had been in Hanoi, really tough, and then in Baghdad. And Saddam Hussein was such a vicious dictator that Zia's Pakistan, I say, you run an inefficient dictatorship. And we in India run an inefficient democracy. So the net level of liberty in the two countries is just about the same.
Also, when Sanjay Gandhi dies, there is not a lot of sorrow. I will not quote the exact para when you describe what your feelings were.
Well, I've been chided for having told the truth about that day.
I think many people share your feelings. Let's move on to the next thing. Even when Rajiv Gandhi you mourn Mrs. Gandhi, even when Rajiv Gandhi becomes Prime Minister and you read about it, you're not actually enthusiastic until you see him in action and you see what he's like as Prime Minister, and you then say, I want to be part of this. Is that fair?
No, when it was suddenly announced on the 31st that Rajiv Gandhi was going to become the Prime Minister, I was quite amazed. In fact, I'd say I was quite upset. I said, here's a man who till yesterday was an Indian Airlines pilot. How is he going to run this country? And it was only after I saw the way in which he ran this country that progressively I came to admire him. And now, when he's being denigrated, when he lost the election and was caught up in swirling controversies, I feel that although some of my friends advise me to let sleeping dogs lie, that I must resurrect those controversies and explain what happened. So I've brought up Shah Bano, I've brought up Bofors, and in my next book, which is going to come out, inshallah or insha chiki, in a few weeks from now, we're going to put it all out. Everything about Bofors, everything about the IPKF, everything about Shah Bano, everything about the Punjab Accord, everything about the Assam Accord, everything about VP Singh and his band of traitors. We're going to put out everything about all the truth about Arun Nehru. We're going to do all that. And I do have a footnote in which I regret that Arun Singh refused to talk to me about his years with Rajiv. So I've told the truth as I saw it, or I saw it through Rajiv's eyes, on Operation Brass Tacks. My problem was that I was no confidant of Rajiv Gandhi. He, in fact, I think, regarded me as politically naive. In any case, he never consulted me, never took my advice on anything political, and I only picked up bits and pieces of gossip as I stayed with him, including one story that is now doing the rounds, attributed to D.P. Tripathi by Neerja Chaudhary. But in my case, I've attributed it to Rajiv because he said so to me himself, that his wife disagreed with him on Shah Bano. And then he says, what do I get out of all this? He says, according to my opposition, every woman, whether she's a Muslim or a non-Muslim, and every man, whether he's of the left, whether he's a liberal, or whether he is a communist, and all modern progressive Muslim young men will vote against me. And the only ones who vote for me are Muslim clerics. So whom am I appeasing? That one sentence reverberated in my mind then and reverberates in my mind now. The man was the most upright, honest, straightforward, principled human being I've ever seen. And the only reason why he was a short-lived prime minister is that he was such a good man. If he had had any of the deviousness of VP Singh or any of the cunning of several other, or he had any of the twisting and turning of Arif Mohammad Khan, he may have lasted as prime minister longer. Okay. But he would not have been the object of my admiration.
Mani, I'm going to throw this open. I think we have time for one or two questions. But like a last question, there was a famous occasion when Narasimha Rao was prime minister, and there was a Congress meeting, and you got up and unprovoked and probably out of context sang the praises of Rajiv Gandhi and what a great prime minister he was, what a great human being he'd been. And R.K. Dhawan said about you, the man is an idiot. He doesn't realize which prime minister is dead and which prime minister is alive. That's actually been true of you all your life, hasn't it? Whenever there's been an opportunity to say anything good about Rajiv Gandhi, and often when there's been no opportunity, you've created one, you've gone on and on.
I don't think I would be so vocal about the virtues of Rajiv Gandhi if it weren't that there were so many, and it's still happening, who are so vocal about what they see as his faults. His faults were his virtues. did what was right. He always put national interest above party interest. That is how he brought peace to Assam. That is how he brought peace to Punjab. That is how he brought peace to Darjeeling. That is how, above all, he brought peace to Mizoram.
Yep.
Don't forget that when Rajiv became the Prime Minister of India, the most insurgent state in India was Mizoram. And today, the most peaceful state in India is Mizoram. And how did that happen? By Rajiv Gandhi asking the leading insurgent, Lal Denga, to, without an election, become the chief minister of Mizoram, and ordering the Congress chief minister, Lalthan Haula, whom Lal Denga had been trying to assassinate for 20 years, to become his deputy. And that was because he felt that it's the only way of bringing the insurgents into the mainstream. He did that in Punjab by handing over the government to the Akali Dal. He did it in Assam by handing over the government to the AGP. He did it in Darjeeling by bringing in the GNLF. He did it in Mizoram by bringing in the insurgents. What a great statesman.
Yep.
He put every principle above party interest. And that is why these slimes left him and formed the National Affront. That was a line I gave Rajiv, and he used it with great effect. It's not a national front, it's a national affront. And the main reason it was a national affront was that they allied with the BJP and opened the door to the India that we see today.
Okay. We can take, I think, one or two quick questions. Anybody who has a question? Yeah, okay. Make the question short because Mani's answer will be very long. Yeah? Go.
Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar, am I audible?
Hello.
Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar, you just now praised Rajiv Gandhi like anything, but one of the excerpts published by The Wire of your book yesterday, you quoted Arun Nehru that he was garnering Hindu vote, and that's why he unlocked the Babri Masjid. But you also blamed Rajiv Gandhi to make mistakes in handling the Babri Masjid issue. What would you like to say?
It shows that I'm even-handed. Yes, I think the Shilanyas was wrong. And I think the biggest mistake that Rajiv Gandhi made was bringing this awful R.K. Dhawan into the Prime Minister's office. It immediately politicized an office that was otherwise, for the previous 4 years, a purely technical office which gave right advice without looking into the politics of the matter, but based on the principles on which the PMO was run, which was the same principles as animated Rajiv Gandhi. And it was a mistake. After all, at the end of the day, he accepted that advice. But I saw the manner in which he tackled this issue in 1990. And that is, the whole of the 1990 story is told in this book. It's when I discovered how communal, how Hindu-oriented P.V. Narasimha Rao was. And it foreshadowed how he would be sitting doing puja while the Babri Masjid was brought down. It also foreshadowed P.V. Narasimha Rao calling me in from my Ram Rahim Yatra, which is described in volume 2 of my memoirs, and saying to me, I have no objection to your yatra, but I disagree with your definition of secularism. So I asked Narasimha Rao, but sir, what's wrong with my definition of secularism? He said, Mani, you don't seem to understand that this is a Hindu country. I sat up in my chair and I said, but that's exactly what the BJP says. So in fact, the first BJP Prime Minister of India was not Atal Bihari Vajpayee. The first BJP Prime Minister was Narasimha Rao.
Okay, I think I'll take one more. Anybody else? Sir, yeah.
Hello.
Sir, quick question, no speech, yeah?
Yeah, sir, the way you mentioned so many issues resolved by Rajiv Gandhi, do you think in future, forthcoming election, Rahul Gandhi will be able to resolve so many issues happening?
I hardly know Mr. Rahul Gandhi. I've had the very least opportunities of meeting him. So I'm not going to comment on Mr. Rahul Gandhi. My political life, my official life, was dominated towards the end by Rajiv Gandhi. And so I've spoken at length, frankly, and I hope honestly, about Rajiv, who is a man I admire, but who, being human, like Gandhiji was, also made mistakes.
Okay. Volume 3 is your years as a minister.
Yes. Well, it includes my years as a minister. It also includes my long years as not a minister.
Is there a lot about Sonia Gandhi in Volume 3?
Well, she is, I think, even in Volume 1.
Yeah.
And
But in Volume 1, the suggestion she wasn't very keen on you.
Volume 2 has some references, I expect, to her.
Okay.
Volume 3...
She denied she was never very keen on you. So
Sorry?
I said it. You get the impression in Volume 1 that she was never very keen on you, which she has just denied.
Well, that may be. I'm delighted that this endorsement has been given in public. But in the 1990s, after Rajiv had been assassinated, I think I made my way only because behind the scenes and well away from my eyes, Sonia ji was standing there as a pillar of support. There were many occasions when the Congress party felt that now that Rajiv Gandhi is gone, let's finish this guy.
Yeah.
And it was only because of Sonia that I survived in the party. It's only because of her that I was made a cabinet minister. I know that the Prime Minister wondered whether he should make me a Minister of State, but it was she who made me a minister. It's she who brought me into the Rajya Sabha. And it's she who indicated to me in 2015, when Chiki suggested I write this book, that she really thought I should write the book. I took that as the sign that she had no plans further for me in politics.
All right. I think that's all the time we have for Mani Shankar Aiyar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.